Ahoy, Aquatic Avengers, and welcome back to the Art Cove. I'm Stingray, and today I will be your guide as we explore the indie depths. Today's topic is Drome by Jesse Lonergan, which, for my money, was the best comic that I read last year. Now, this is a graphic novel that this is the only way it was released was in the, so far was in this large hardcover edition. It was not a monthly release. It didn't come out in floppies. So all we have is this wonderful, lovely hardcover edition. But this is a book by a creator named Jesse Lonergan. Now, if you're not familiar with Jesse, you probably should be, because in the last several years, he has really kind of made a name for himself. And honestly, I think he is one of the most unique voices in comics today. So let's talk a little bit about what he's done so far that you may or may not have heard of. Jesse does creator-owned books that he writes and draws himself, like Drome, and he's been doing it for a while now. He actually had a comic come out in 2014 called All-Star, which he wrote and drew, which is a baseball comic. He did a book for Image that came out in 2020 called Planet Paradise, which I believe was an OGN, a graphic novel. 2020, he did a single issue comic called Hydra, which was also an Image book, which was maybe in a way something that he was doing to kind of experiment or to maybe like a prototype for what he would do in Drome in terms of some of the storytelling and the grid system. But that was a cool one-off sci-fi comic about like space exploration and some astronauts and the adventures that they got into. But he's done work with other people and for other companies as well. He has done several Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics through IDW, as well as some IDW Star Wars books. He did a story with, I think, with a writer in Metal Hurlant, which came out in 2021. He has worked on a Dark Horse Hellboy related series with Mike Mignola called Miss Truesdale. I think the first one was called Miss Truesdale and the Hyperborean Age or something like that. And then there's another one that is either ongoing right now or just finished called Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Man, I think. I think there's been two minis basically, but it's Jesse and Mike Mignola partnered up, which is kind of a cool pairing or partnership. Another series that he did is a 5-part miniseries through Boom Studios. It came out in 2024 called Man's Best. And that one had him paired up with writer Pornsak Pinchisho. That one I have read and I thought it was a really great book. It's basically a sci-fi story about these three animals, two dogs and a cat that are cybernetically enhanced. They have suits and attachments. When, if you hear the description, it might put you in the mind of the classic comic WE3, We 3 by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Only the difference is in this book, the animals are enhanced in order to help human beings with space exploration and help to better mankind as opposed to murder them, like in We 3. So Man's Best is great. Jesse does a great job of making kind of cute animals, making you care about them. Really good design work with all the sci-fi stuff, the spaceships, the suits that the animals wear. But that book also really shows off his penchant for unusual panel and page layouts, right? He is very, very creative with his panel usage, different shapes. He likes to do circular, concentric circles a lot. He likes to work with grids. He definitely does not stick with what we think of as traditional panel layouts in terms of comics. He's not just doing your standard fare. And that's kind of what he's become known for is, he knows the rules, I think, for what we think of as traditional comic page and panel layout. And he doesn't like to stick with it. He likes to do his own thing, and he comes up with some really unique and interesting layouts that play with shapes and play with, how motion and how time is portrayed in comics. And that's definitely something that we're going to talk about with Drome. So Jesse also has done a few backup stories for other books. If you're familiar with the sci-fi, fantasy, action adventure book Kaya from Image by Wes Craig, Jesse did a 5-page backup story for an issue of Kaya. My friend Carl of Carl's Collection owns 2 of the 5 pages there because I think he wussed out and didn't get all 5. But I'm I'm not jealous or anything. It's cool. But yeah, so Jesse did a 5-page story for Kai, which was really cool. He got to use his fun way of portraying panels and things to draw a labyrinth on the page and then destroy it on the next page. And so that was really cool. He also did I think it was an 8-page backup story. It was a weird one-off black and white horror story that was in the back of an issue of a James Tynion horror book from, it was either Boom or Image, I think. It was called Let This One Be a Devil, which was a very unique take on the legend of the Jersey Devil. Jesse's story didn't have anything to do with that. It was an interesting black and white story that, again, he used very, very non-standard page and panel layouts to tell this horror story. Really good stuff. So if you're interested, after hearing about Drome, if you're interested in reading some of Jesse's back catalog, be sure to go check out some of these books. Now, let's talk about Drome. What is it? Well, Drome is a standalone 312-page graphic novel written and drawn completely by Jesse Lonergan that came out in August of 2025. At its base, I would say the story is a creation myth. It's a story about a desolate world where there is no life, and a celestial being comes along and decides to create life. Chaos ensues, and we kind of follow the trajectory and the story of some of the people that sprang forth from the efforts of these celestial beings. You know, we kind of follow their story, and toward the end of the book, they kind of start to interact with those celestial beings. They discover that the celestial beings exist, and they start to vie for power and ask them for things. And then, yeah, I don't want to get too much into it. If you guys haven't read this yet, I'll go ahead and say now, I will perhaps get into some spoilery or spoiler adjacent territory as I discuss the book more, but I'm going to try not to, get too deep into the story. I want to let you guys experience it for yourselves, basically. But be warned, I may say some things that kind of, get loosely spoilery. So just be aware and use your own judgment. Anyways, so creation myth and following kind of like what happens after life is created, right? What's interesting is this is a mostly silent book. There's no captions that establish a location or a time or anything like that. I don't think that there are any thought balloons. All of the text in this book, I believe, is dialogue, which is presented in word balloons. And the word balloons are sparse, right? There's no long speeches. You can go for several pages at a time, and there's no dialogue, no words whatsoever. And then you turn a page, and there might be one word balloon with one sentence in it that's like 3 or 4 words long. Sometimes it's a single word. Right. So the dialogue is used very sparingly in this book, and the story is mostly told through the art. This is a very art-forward story. This is definitely a narrative that is driven primarily by the art. And it's really intriguing because Jesse uses a lot of different techniques in this book to push the story forward, to present things like motion, the passing of time, and all of that. So let's go ahead and talk a bit about the art and what Jesse's doing in this book. So the first thing that you're going to notice with reading this, and even just looking at the cover, is the grid system. So you see this grid on the cover. There's 35 squares on the cover. There's 5 columns and 7 rows. And if you open the book, you're going to see that same grid established on every page of the book. And that is the basis for Jesse's art. Every page is made up of this grid, this mathematical division of the artwork, right? And it's interesting because Jesse begins the grid. He shows you right on the front cover, this is what you're getting into. This is what this book is going to be. And so you have the 35 square grid system. And then you have, if you have a double page spread, you have 2 pages with 35 squares. Thus you have 70 squares to work with, right? 10 columns and 7. And it's really, I don't know if this was a like intentional choice, but it's interesting that Drome is 5 letters. And so it fits, the five columns. I thought that was an interesting choice right off the bat. And then you also get to see things like the fact that this character in the background is kind of broken up by the borders between the squares, but this character is in front of the borders. She is not broken up by the borders of the squares. What does that mean? That's something we'll get into. I will give you some of my thoughts on that. Now, if we look at the back cover, it's still the same grid, right? We still have 35 squares there. But some of the squares, like this panel, is 4 squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We still have 7 rows. So we have a 1, 2 row and 2 column panel. So we have 4 squares there. This one is 1, 2, 3 squares across, and that's it, right? Here you have a 1 by 2. Here you have another 2 by 2. Even the barcode is a 1 by 2 or 2 by 1 panel in the grid system that Jesse has established. How cool is that? Like, how much thought did he have to put into the design of the back cover to get the barcode to work in there? You know, like I just, even his name on the bottom of the front cover is contained within a cube that is part of the grid system that he has established. That's how deep this goes. Now, I'm gonna blow your minds. If we take off the dust jacket, we have another grid. And this is cool because this is where you start to see, like, those lines kind of disappear behind the character that's here on the cover. And then this line here, it starts and then it turns into drops. And so the line's not there, but you can imagine it because it kind of the drops kind of continue to flow down where the line would be. And then we see the drop here. We see one drop here. We see a partial drop and a whole drop, a partial and a whole, and another partial, and then the sploosh. We don't have the line separating these panels, but we kind of can imagine it because of the drops, but then we're also seeing the passage of time. Is this one drop that we're seeing in multiple places? But here we're seeing a partial and a whole, and so we're seeing the continuous drip. We're seeing motion and the passage of time going through these squares on the cover. So Jesse is showing us exactly what he's going to be doing. And I think that's pretty fascinating. Now, let's talk about the book itself. If you open up the front cover even, it's kind of hard to see. It's a little bit faint, but you even see the grid on these front pages here. Now, when we open up the book, the very, very, very first page that you're going to see is this. I want you to keep this one in mind because I'm going to come back to this. Because this one, it looks like it's just a page, because then you get into like the credits where they talk about the publisher and all that stuff. But you'll notice how we're still on the grid system, right? And then you get into like the title and all that. So this front page here, it may be nothing, but I think it's something. And I'm going to come back to that. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Then even the table of contents, right, is on the grid system. But I like the way that it has the negative space to either side of the actual table of contents, because it kind of draws your eye to the table of contents, right? And then we get to what ostensibly what appears to be the first page of the book. And this establishes the grid system. All right, so that's the first page of the book. Let me find, now I want to show you another 2-page spread that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more in depth later, but look at this one. So this one uses the grid system across 2 pages, right? And we see how Jesse is breaking the panels. He's breaking the borders. He's using instead of having one large image that uses the entire grid, he's got it separated out into multiple images across multiple characters, multiple viewpoints, different angles, right? So there's really a lot going on here. And what's fascinating is, like, you know, normal comics pages can do all of this as well, but typically there are different size and shape panels on the page, and they don't necessarily conform to any system or anything. All of these panels are created as a part of the system that Jesse's established, this grid system. And that kind of fascinates me, you know, the fact that you have like a 1 square panel next to a 2 square panel, or like a 5, or like, you know, it's really fascinating how that works. And you know, he can have weird ones like you know, 2 down and 1 over, like a 3 square panel, right? It's like he's playing Tetris with the page and telling the story through these shapes. The way that he breaks panels, so like this one here, right here, where you have this guy with the sword, right? He's dancing around. He's a very fluid fighter. He's moving around and swinging the sword. But in this instance, you have a 2x2, like a 4 square panel there, right? But you see his top half here and his bottom half over there. That's like, why don't we see his whole body? Why didn't Jesse draw him standing here and then standing there? Because it's an economy of space, right? He's showing the character kind of dashing to the side, and we just see his feet move, because that's all you really need to know, is that that's how he's moving. That's how fast he's going, that we see him here and then we see him there almost simultaneously. That's how quick he is. That's how we're breaking out time, right? And like, it's funny because as I was reading this the first time, it made me think that Jesse might be really familiar with Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which, funnily enough, I only read for the first time last year. But in that book, Scott McCloud gets into the philosophy and the dynamics of motion and time and things like that, and how they're presented in a comic, how, you know, the space between panels can represent time, and how the size of a panel, like if you want to have a large panel or a wide panel, that can express a longer period of time than, say, like a really narrow, skinny panel. And so one thing that I think is interesting, if we go back to that first page here, you'll notice this celestial being in the starry sky there. His body is being divided up by the borders of the squares, right? They're cutting through his shoulders, his chest, the horns, and everything else, but not his face. There is a line that is connecting up right on his eye line, but we see the facial features, we see the lines, the crow's feet, and his eyes are not being broken up by that line. They could have been. The line is clearly there, and it's not going behind him. It is going in front of, like, whatever the hood or whatever the helmet that is that he's wearing. That is behind those lines, but those lines come up and stop at the sides of his face. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but to me, that kind of makes me think that it represents this character being outside of time. He's not affected by time. This is one of the minor spoilery things I'm going to say. Not too far into the book, after life has been created, another celestial being comes in and says, "Give them time." And you see her drop a small thing into the world, and now they have time. Time passes for them. They didn't have time before until the celestials gave it to them. And I'm using the term loosely, celestial, because I don't know what else to call them. Time didn't exist within this world and for the people of this world until it was given to them. So that makes me think also, it further pushes the idea, to me at least, that these celestial beings are outside of time. And I think that that's an interesting little touch, because that's something like the face being white with the white lines coming into it from the borders between the squares. You might not notice that. It's such a small little detail, but I think I saw that at one point, and it really, it gave me pause, and I thought about it a lot. And I think that's what's going on there. I could be wrong. And since we already know that life is being created, I'm going to show you this page. This is where the celestial being there drops the seed of life onto the planet below. And I love, like, you know, the unusual polyhedral shapes there that use the grid system, but do it in a completely different way. They're not just squares. It's really interesting how Jesse chose to divide those up. And then on the next page, you see, you know, life starting to form beneath the surface of this world. So that's another, you know, example of multiple panels of different sizes that use up a different number of squares within the grid to create the panels on the page. And I think that's really cool. So we get lots of cool stuff like that. And then we have a page like where we have life, all the different animals that show up here. So we have humans, we have animals. And again, you see that Jesse is breaking. This one doesn't have a lot of squares on it. He's using page wide panels, but there's a big one, and then there's the smaller, thinner ones. And even the lines are being broken by the animals there. And then we get really cool design element, very graphically intriguing pages. This is kind of what the result looks like of when the Celestials decide to give them time. And then time passes, and you know, we get really awesome pages like that shows a bunch of combat. This one, the grid system, but how many panels do we have on this page, right? How many squares are being broken or being kind of crunched together to be bigger panels. And this page is also cool because we see another visual element that Jesse throws in, the motion lines. Like if you look at the left-hand side of the page, the second, third, and fourth squares down, right, you see the guy being chopped in half, and you see the arc of the sword. And what's really interesting is you see the red-haired woman with her sword kind of down like this. because of that line of motion, it's not showing us where her sword is going, it's showing us where it's been. So when you get to that part of the page, you can follow that arc back up and realize, oh, she just chopped that guy in half. And then in the upper right-hand corner of the page, we have a couple of more slashes like that of swords and spears being slashed around. It's just really crazy how Jesse's able to control exactly where we're looking, exactly, where our eye is going. Because some of these pages at first glance, because of the unusual grid system and the weird panel shapes, like that upper left-hand corner has exactly what I was talking about there. There's a 1, 2, 3 square panel there with another panel under it, a single square panel there. Some of these pages feel a little bit chaotic, but Jesse knows that, and so he's using these motion lines in just the right places. He's deploying them sparingly, but also strategically to help us understand what we should be looking at in what order. And I think that that's just really, really, really fantastic. So for this page, like, this is a chaotic battle where there's a lot of fighting, and we see where fists are going. We see where punches are going, where they were. In the very middle bottom there, we see the character Blue, that's her name, but we see her doing like a drop kick to somebody's face, and there's a motion line that goes from the panel before that all the way through into the next panel. It shows you the route that her feet took to arrive at that person's face. These are the kinds of things that I think make this book really cool, but there's more to it than that. Another element of the book that's really fascinating is the importance of color. And so this is where I want to get into that first page, the very first page of the book, which may or may not be the first page of the story. And then that other page with that first page with the celestial, with the lines going up to but not through his face, which is what I think most people would assume is the first story page. I want to talk about those again now. So this first page of the book, right, when you open up and you get past there, you've got this plain white page with these 4 colorful squares at the bottom. And those colors are cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or CMYK. If you're not aware, CMYK are the colors that are used in printing. And they're used for comics. And if you've ever heard of like 4-color comics, like from back in the old days, those were the 4 colors that were used in printing comics. And it's interesting to me that Jesse has those 4 colors in that order on that first page. And then if we go back to what is probably maybe the first page of the book, of the story, right? This one here with the celestial guy, he is peering down through this portal. And then we see at the bottom a separate panel that's like we're looking through a window or a looking glass of some kind at this desolate world. We've got this kind of blank, hazy gray sky in the background that meets with some hills or mountains, the land, right? We see the horizon. But around that horizon, around this view, we have a cyan border at the top, a magenta border at the left, a yellow border at the right, and a black border at the bottom. Okay, so bear with me for a moment because we're about to get kind of maybe a little bit pretentious. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into this, but this is kind of the thoughts that were going through my head as I read this story, and then especially when I reread it the second time. By the way, the horn dude, if we look at the table of contents, he's labeled as Form, so I'm going to call him that from now on. Form appears to be looking through this portal at this barren world, and it's bordered by the CMYK colors. So when you look at a page in a comic book, you're looking at a world, a fake world, a fictitious world, a world that exists because it was created by CMYK. It was created because you had a blank page and color was added to it. So what if on this first page that's all white and it has those 4 blocks of color on it? What if this is telling us that, maybe it's similar to other creation type myths? In the beginning, there was nothing, which is represented by all the white space. But then color was introduced, and that created something. And so now Form is looking through that portal that is made up of the CMYK, and there's a world there. So there was nothing, and then there was something because color was added. And then, he drops that seed and initiates life. So in my mind, this is a metaphor perhaps for comic books. Because when you're looking at a page in a comic book, you're looking at a world that was created by the addition of color, right? You're looking at a world, you had a white page and then color was added to it and created this world. So maybe in a way, this is a metaphor for comic worlds being worlds that are created by adding color. The other interesting thing that occurred to me when thinking about this, let's go back to the table of contents for a moment. Basically, the story is divided up into 5 chapters, and each one is represented by a color. And each chapter is kind of represented by a character that has rather a huge impact on the story within that chapter. The first chapter is called Blue, and it's that blue woman that we saw. She's not really the focus character. Like, we swap back and forth between a couple of characters, but she has kind of a very big impact on the story in that chapter. And then the second chapter is called Red. We have this other character who is introduced, and, we just refer to him as Red. No names are introduced for any of these characters. And he has a fairly significant impact on the story in that case. The third chapter is Yellow, and we're introduced to this large yellow fire creature thing. It's never really explained what it is, but that creature has a fairly significant impact on the story moving forward. The fourth chapter is Form, and the final chapter is Spirit, which are the 2 celestial characters. Form is represented by black, and Spirit is like all white. So you might think that there would only be 4 chapters. You'd have the C, the Y, the M, and the K, and which we see in that order again. So you have blue, red, yellow, and Form, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But then we also have Spirit, which is white. And so it's interesting to me because Form and Spirit are black and white in this, and they are like the celestial creatures, beings, whatever you want to think of them as. There was no life before them, and the life kind of came after color was added into this world, right? So I think color is associated with the act of creation. Without color, there was nothing. But so Form and Spirit also kind of like, Form is the one that created life in this world that we see in this book, but then Spirit is there, and like later in the story, again, minor spoilers potentially, she kind of deals with the afterlife, right? Death and the afterlife, rather. And so it's interesting to me because it's like, I kind of think maybe, and again, I'm not ascribing any authorial intent to Jesse Lonergan. These are the thoughts that went through my head as I was reading this book. And it has to do more with the color, right? So like black and white are the stuff of creation. That's where life originates, right? But you need color to make things actually like live and move and breathe and stuff like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like you have the black and white, and that's the basis for everything else. And then you add color to get life into something, right? I think that's kind of what I'm thinking. And so that's kind of a metaphor for how comics work, maybe, right? I don't know. This whole thing could be a treatise on like how comic worlds are created by, starting out with black and white and then adding color, but through the lens of like Greek mythology or something. Again, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's kind of like the thought process that was going through my head, that we are seeing the world on the page, and these are worlds that are created in 4 colors. I don't know. But the fact that I got to that point, the fact that these thoughts had occurred to me while I was reading this book, to me, I don't have thoughts like that when I'm reading a Spider-Man comic. Don't get me wrong, I love Spider-Man. I am a diehard Spider-Man fan. I've been reading Spider-Man for over 30 years, and I will probably be for another 30 years, Spidey books don't tend to get this deep. And again, maybe I'm looking for something that's not there, but the fact that I can read that into this book is truly fascinating to me. I know that Carl from Carl's Collection, again, is a big fan of this book. He and I have had pretty lengthy discussions about this one, and we both think it's a really great book. Not only is the story really interesting, it's weird, right? Because this story is kind of, on its surface, it's almost, I don't want to say simple, but it's fairly straightforward. Life is created, chaos ensues, and then we just follow the lives of these characters and see what the struggles that they go through, the emotions that they deal with, and the natural ebb and flow of life. And there's kind of a natural conclusion to the story the first time somebody dies. That's kind of where it leaves off. And it's interesting because, speaking of the emotions, I think that they kind of, again, it harkens back to the color and the importance of color to this story. So for example, Blue, she is introduced as a means of control. And she comes from the sea, the ocean, right? She comes from water, which is kind of where the color comes from, I think, because blue is associated with water. But she's meant to give the people of this new world a sense of control. She's there to help them kind of rein things in. And blue is a color that's associated with calm and mindfulness. It's more cold and calculating and not as emotional or it's not as explosive. But then she meets the character Red, and he looks more like an animal. He is found out in the forest living among the animals. And he gets angry a lot. He's very animalistic. His emotions are very, very forward. So again, the colors seem to kind of the characters and the colors that they are represented by seem to go kind of hand in hand with the emotions and things like that are usually associated with those colors. It feels like reading this book that all of the choices that were made, from the colors to the panels, the grid, everything is just very deliberate. It's very intentional on Jesse's part. And I don't know how long it took him to create this book, but I feel like it had to have been a time-consuming process, because there's just so much going on here. And this book is absolutely worth reading multiple times, because again, on its surface, it can seem kind of straightforward. And at 312 pages, it's not a thin book, but with it being kind of light on the text and the dialogue, you can kind of get through it relatively quickly if you're just kind of like skimming the art. But again, I think it's really worth digging into and really poring over the pages, because there's a lot going on in the art. There's a lot to admire with what Jesse is doing here. And I would say that this book overall is a masterclass in what comics can be. It's really interesting how Jesse established this grid system from the cover. You don't even have to open the book to see what he's doing. It's all there. He quickly breaks his own rule set, or at least what we thought was the rule set, right? They say that in order to break the rules, you have to understand the rules. I mean, when you make your own rule system, I guess it's even easier to break it. And I think that's what we're seeing Jesse do here. And, this book, to me, firmly establishes him as a master of the craft. And honestly, I can't wait to see what else he does and where he goes from here. At this point in time, I would say that this is his opus by quite a margin, right? I mean, I haven't read a lot of the other books, the ones that I talked about earlier, like I read Hedra when it came out a few years ago, and I like that. But I think this is a much deeper story, and this is more firmly grounded in that grid system. I don't think Hedra used it quite to the success that he has achieved here. And Man's Best was a great story, and it was a fun comic, and I thought the art was wonderful, but that was written by somebody else, so Jesse wasn't quite in full control there. But this book is, again, it's masterful, and I think a lot of people have named it the number one book that they read in 2025, and I would absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. It is easily the best comic that I read last year. There were some really good comics that came out last year, and I would say, like, I have a series in mind that I might do another video on later that I want to talk about. That was the best series that came out last year. But just as far as overall comic project, whether it be a single issue or a graphic novel or a series, Drome is the best thing to come out last year. And I think this is a book that people are going to be talking about for years to come. And I know that there has been a lot of talk, like in Europe. I think it's won several awards over there. I don't know if it's won any awards in the States yet, but if it hasn't, it should. It absolutely deserves them. It'll be interesting to see what kind of accolades that Jesse receives for this book, because it is so good. It is, if you're looking for a comic that goes beyond the basic comics, that the superhero stuff, if you're looking for a comic that it taps into this, literally taps into the stuff of legends. Like, this is every bit a mythology story, and it taps into creation, and it's also just, it celebrates the medium of comic art, right? It celebrates the idea of panels and pages and art telling a story. This is narrative art, and this is what I want. I want more comics like this. Like, I love my superheroes, I do, and I will continue to read them, and I'll continue to roll my eyes at them when I think that they're not good, and I'll continue to celebrate when they are good. But like, I want more of this. I want more stuff that tickles my brain more and engages me in ways and makes me want to go back and reread it multiple times, and to study the art in more detail and discover new things about it every time I read it. So if you're looking for a very, very excellent read, and if you like comics as narrative art storytelling, this is the book for you. I guarantee you won't be disappointed with it. I think this is a great book. I absolutely love it. I've read it twice now. I'm probably going to read it at least 2 or 3 more times. And if you have read it, I would love to hear what you thought of it. I'd love to have more of a discussion on it. Like, let's start a discourse. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. If you haven't read it, I implore you, check it out, give it a chance, and then come back and let me know what you thought. I love this book. I want to talk more about it. I want to hear more of people's opinions on it. So let me know what you thought. I think for now, I've said everything that I have to say on this one. Love it, love it, love it. Can't recommend it high enough. I'm going to go ahead and call it quits there. I hope you found this interesting and entertaining, and I will see you in the next video.